We have got a packed house today. That is awesome to see. It's good to see Brandy and her family here from Texas.
Yes.
About time you get that. I know the brother and sister Wagons Pack are have extra big smiles today. So just too bad you couldn't be here for camp with all the situation going. But we did have some great services last 2 nights for the youth. They were challenged. I believe they will respond. So it's good to see that. It's good to see them worship and at least get something amongst all this stuff that we're dealing with. So today, for our Sunday school lesson, we're doing God Sees All. Our focus thought is because God sees all things, we should seek to please Him with our actions. Our lesson text is 1 Kings 21, 1-7 and 17-20. And it came to pass after these things that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard, which was in Jezreel. Hard by the palace of Ahab of Samaria. And Ahab spake unto Naboth, saying, Give me thy vineyard, that I may have it for a garden of herbs, because it is near unto my house, and I will give thee for a better vineyard than it, or if it seems good to thee, I will give thee the money, the worth of it in money. And Naboth said to Ahab, The Lord forbid it me, that I should give the inheritance of my fathers unto thee. And Ahab came into his house heavy and displeased, because the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he said, I will not give thee the inheritance of my father. And he laid down upon his bed and turned away his face, and he would not eat, and he would eat no bread. But Jezebel his wife came to him and said unto him, Why is thy spirit so sad? Thou eatest no bread. And he said unto her, Because I spake unto Naboth the Jezreelite, and said unto him, Give me thy vineyard for money, or else, if it please thee, I will give thee the vineyard of it. Give thee another vineyard, or in answer, I will not give thee my vineyard. And Jezebel's wife said unto him, Dost thou not own the kingdom of Israel, or govern the kingdom of Israel? Arise and eat, and let thine heart be merry. I will give thee thy vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. And then on verse 17, And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Arise, go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, which is in Samaria. Behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, whether he is gone down to possess it. And thou shalt speak to him, saying, Thus saith the Lord, Hast thou killed and also taken possession? And thou shalt speak unto him, saying, Thus saith the Lord, In the place where dogs lick the blood of Naboth's blood, shall dogs lick thy blood, even thine. And Ahab said to Elijah, Hast thou found me, O mine enemy? And he answered, I have found thee, because thou hast sold thyself to work evil in the sight of the Lord. So we all pretty much know this story in the Bible. Elijah goes down and he wants a specific vineyard. It's better than, it's close to his place, and he sees it as to be, Ahab. And he goes down and he sees this vineyard. He wants it because it's nearby him. He doesn't want to have to go so far to get what he wants. And so he looks at Naboth. He says, Give me your vineyard. And Naboth's like, No, this is my inheritance.
Right, preach.
The devil does that to us. He says, if I'll give you all the things of the world if you'll just give me your inheritance. If you'll give me what you've got, I'll take it from you and give you something better. I'll give you the money's worth. And we have to be like Naboth and say, God has forbidden me to give you my inheritance. Our inheritance is heaven. Amen. So our culture connection, Winnie's husband passed away unexpectedly while they were pastoring. After gaining the strength to move on with her life, she moved to New York. The move was a good one, a good change, and God provided her with a nursing job at which she excelled. Wendy's son, Keith, had been waiting for a heart transplant for almost 4 years, but he had no way of acquiring the level of care he would need after surgery. While Wendy was in town visiting him, she asked, Am I going to need to come and take care of you after your transplant? And Keith being a good son, he didn't want to burden his mom with that care. I mean, that's a big thing for a person to have to take care of you after you've had a surgery. Keith was quite startled and responded that he would never ask her to make that sacrifice. As they were talking, the pastor walked over and joined them during the conversation. After hearing the conversation, the pastor told them of a recent meeting he had been in. That very week, a group of church leaders had been trying to formulate a plan to get Keith the help he needed. They decided it would only work if they could somehow get Wendy to help, but she would need to quit her job and move back to the area. Within 2 weeks of the conversation, Wendy was offered 2 jobs. Both made it possible for her to work from home and move back to help Keith with the transplant. Within a few months, Wendy moved and the transplant was successful. God sees the needs of his people, and when we seek him and care for one another, he will always work the details out. Yes. It's God's timing is always, we talk about that here, it's always in God's timing. And I mean, this man had waited 4 years for a transplant after he lost his dad. And it just works out that God winds up giving her two job opportunities because he sees all that we do. He knows everything that's going on in our lives. Even when we can't see what's coming up tomorrow, he already knows what's coming up tomorrow.
That's right.
The only this is contemplating the topic. So the survivor of the shipwreck was washed up on a small and uninhabited island. He prayed fervently for God to rescue him. Every day he scanned the horizon to help, but no hope was in sight. Exhausted from the effort, he finally resigned himself to living out his life on the island all alone. Eventually, he managed to build a little hut of driftwood for protection from the elements and to store a few possessions. One day, after scavenging for food, he arrived home to find his little hut in flames, the smoke rolling up to the sky. Just when he thought things could possibly get no worse, they did. Suddenly, everything that he had lost, he was stunned with grief and anger towards God. God, how could you let this happen to me? He cried. He simply could not believe that God would allow this to happen to him with all that had already gone wrong in his life. Early the next day, however, he was awakened by the sound of a ship approaching the island. He could hear its foghorn blaring from beyond the coastline. Soon a small group of sailors arrived in a rowboat. They had come to rescue him. He asked, "How did you know that I was here?" And they said, "That smoke signal you sent up yesterday alerted us to where you were at." God allowed his hut to be burned so that somebody else would know where he was at. God answered the prayer. It's always not how we think God's going to answer the prayer. We always think it's going to be, it should be this particular path that God should do this. And God's like, no, we're going to do this my way. And so he winds up giving us something we don't ever expect. And it's a completely different thing than what we're thinking. But he always answers those prayers. He's always seeing everything that we do.
That's right.
Regardless of how bad life gets, we need to remember that God sees all and is working for our good beyond what we can see. Yes. It used to be that if we were assigned a research paper in school, we would go to the library, pull off books off the shelf. We were limited only by the number of books available. But today, we simply search Google for a topic, and more resources are at our disposal than we could possibly ever read. Computer technology and the internet have expanded our ability to acquire information and knowledge, almost beyond comprehension. Even at that, we are finite and limited in what we actually know. The smartest among us still does not know everything there is to know. But God is omniscient. There is nothing unknown to him. He knows that Google knows. He knows what Google knows and even more. Isaiah 40:13-14 states, "Who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord, or instruct the Lord as his counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him, and who taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge, or showed him the path of understanding?" And that's according to the NIV.
All right.
That's right.
So omniscience, as defined as the state of having total knowledge, the quality of knowing everything. And I was looking at the word omniscient, and you can split it up into 2 words, omni and science. And that's what our science today does, is they try to know everything. But they're not omniscient. They know a little bit, but they don't know all. They try to know all, but they don't really know all. But our God is both. He knows all the science. He knows everything that happened because he created it. And so he's omniscient. For God to truly be sovereign over his creation, he has to be all-knowing. The Bible tells us his knowledge is so vast, he even knows the minute details, like the number of hairs on your head, and every time a sparrow falls to the ground.
That's right.
No detail is so small that God does not know it. No knowledge or thought is so deep that it is beyond him.
That's right.
Psalms 139:15-16 declares to us just how omniscient God is when it comes to our person. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven into the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. Can you imagine that? Before you were even formed, God knew the design of the days that you would be in the future. He would know our plans that we were going to make. He would know everything about us. And only God knows with certainty what holds tomorrow.
Right.
That's right.
Because we're not promised tomorrow. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. But God knows whether we're going to be here. He knows whether we're going to get up in the morning feeling sick, or if we're going to have a good day. He knows if it's going to rain or if it's going to be sunshiny. God knows all and he sees all. And a lot of times we complain about the weather because we don't like it. But God's not wrong with it, because God knows what we need. He knows what we need for tomorrow to happen, for next week, for next month.
That's right.
I mean, we have our winters up here with lots of snow sometimes, and sometimes there's not. I think back to this last winter when we had all the rain up through December. And I looked it up, and 1 inch of rain equals a foot of snow. And we got inches of rain between October and December.
That's right.
Inches, like 10 inches. I'm thinking if that would have been snow like normal, how many times we were going to have to shovel our roofs or get plowed out here at the church and have to spend the money to do that, because that all costs money. And so God takes care of us in more ways than we realize, because he does see all. So, a question for us. Does the fact that God knows everything bring you fear or bring you comfort? And explain.
I think sometimes it's a little of both.
Mm-hmm.
Comfort in the fact that, he's got your back and knows that everything will work out for the good. But fear in the fact that it's stuff that you're hiding from him, from the world, he already knows it, and you're fearful of that.
Exactly. I mean, it should, as a Christian, be a comfort.
Yes.
And as a sinner, it should be fear. Because God is going to bring down judgment. I mean, we see that all through the Old Testament. He brings down judgment on the Israelites, and even with dealing with Ahab and Elijah, he's going to bring down judgment on Ahab for the sins that he's committed. So he should fear God in that. But if you make it right, then you shouldn't have to fear God. But we all sin. And so we do fear sometimes that we've done God wrong, and he still sees it. So yeah, I would absolutely agree with
I
that.
think it could be an accountability thing too with a Christian. Not only knowing that the Lord sees all, and we have that comfort, but on the other side of that is that the accountability to God, because we know that he sees. The Bible says you can't do wrong and get by, or be sure your sins will find you out.
Right.
Or we were talking about that last night, that my grandmother always used to say, be sure your sins will find you out. You can't do wrong. There's an all-seeing eye watching you.
That's right.
So as a kid, you're like traumatized, but knowing that, it's a good thing also.
Right.
Because, the Lord's always got his eye upon his children. So
Right.
that's good.
Yeah, because even when we're going through trials and we know that God's there watching us, and when we're there, he picks us up, just like he did with Peter when Peter was walking on the water, and takes his eyes off of Jesus.
Yeah.
And he looks back and cries out, and Jesus reaches down and picks him up because he's always watching him. He does that for us in our daily lives as well. So realizing God knows everything should be a source of security and comfort for us. The foundation of our faith is based on the facts that God does not change and that God knows everything. The reason you can trust him is because he knows everything. According to Hebrews 4:13, nothing is hidden from God. Neither is there any creature that is not manifest in his sight. For all things are naked and open unto the eyes of him whom we have to do. While for some, this would be a reason to tremble in fear, to those who are born again and faithfully serving him, it is a comfort. Just knowing God sees everything, no matter how hidden it is to the eyes of men, means God is aware of all times of what is happening to each of us. His knowledge of what we do not know means he answers and his answers and solutions that we will never find out on our own. So 1 Kings 21, 1 through 13 tells of a man named Naboth who owned a vineyard. Owning the land meant of a certain amount of security for the person and the family's vineyard, and the person's family, A vineyard in that day would have been a great value due to the demand for wine for both common people as well as the military. Great value would be the place on such a piece of land, not only for what it produces, but also for what it will provide in the future. So our second question, is there something that you have that gives you certain of security because you own it?
Like for me, it's my house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this was something I did all on my own, and it's mine.
Right.
I worked hard to get it.
Absolutely. Our vehicles.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, vehicles are not cheap. Some vehicles cost what houses used to cost. You know, I mean, when you think back about it, it's, I mean, $40,000, $50,000 for a vehicle nowadays. I remember when I was a kid, Mom bought a house for $5,000. You know, I mean, it was an older house, but still, I mean, there's used vehicles that are that price.
Right.
But those are things that make us feel secure, to get us to work, to get us around, to get us where we need and want to go. And so we do feel secure as a result of owning these things, but they're just temporal. You know, I mean, God is really, our salvation is what we can feel secure in. Knowing that God has got us as long as we follow the book and follow what we need to do, that's where we need to really be putting our security in. But as we're on earth, we need to feel secure. And so to have security in temporal things is not necessarily a bad thing. We just need to remember that our ultimate goal for security is heaven and is salvation.
That's right.
In ancient times, many people did not own land, but would farm land and sell whatever was produced on the land. Considering that the majority of people were not wealthy and had limited means, if a man owned property, it would be considered much better off than the man who merely farmed the land for someone else. In this case, Naboth had inherited the vineyard. This means he understood the worth and the price that had been paid by his forefathers. Not only was there the value in the land itself, but it also had the significant emotional value to him and his family. The vineyard was not something to treat casually or just sell off and to make life easier. You know, and we do that. We get saved, and there's a lot of backsliders out there. And we think there's an easier way. We think, you know, if we could just have a better job, or we could have a better life if we would just go do this. It'd be so much easier than having to follow the standards of the church and, you know, the standards that are put forth in the Bible and living this holy life. We could just do whatever we want. But the Bible says that's only for a season. And in that season, when that season's come to an end, you're not happy anymore. You're not happy out there if you're into drugs and alcohol, doing drugs and alcohol. You're not, any addiction you have doesn't fulfill that need anymore.
Right.
The only thing that fulfills it, especially if you've got the Holy Ghost, is the Holy Ghost, and your spirit knows that. I mean, you can do anything you want, and nothing will ever fill that hole until you come back and you pray back through and you get refilled with the Holy Ghost. Nothing will ever fix that. So next question. What things have you inherited that have great value to you?
I have a watch that's been passed down from the first girl to have the first girl to have the first girl from my mom's side of the family. And it doesn't matter to me what the actual monetary value is. I just love it because it's been in the family so long.
Mhm. Anyone else?
No, it's got good hair in it. It's probably.
I gotta say Grisham.
Grisham. Anybody else? You know, I mean, some of us have grown up in the church, and you know, I grew up in the church, but we were, you know, wasn't born into it. But I consider this what Mom brought us to, an inheritance.
Yeah.
You know, and even though I left for so many years and came back to it, it's still, I'm glad that it was instilled in me and it was given to me as an inheritance. I mean, I know, we look at the human side of things, the monetary side of things, and I don't really have anything that has been handed down. Well, I guess I've got some. My grandpa was killed coming back from World War II, and so I've got some of his medals that was handed down to us, and so those are important to me. But probably the most important thing is the fact that I had a mother that would get me up for church every morning, whether I wanted to or not, whether I was sick or not. Get up, let's go to church. You're not that sick, let's go to church. You know, and she has instilled in me that that foundation to want to come to church, even though my life wasn't always in church. It was always there. God always kept us just off the path, but not so far off that we couldn't make it back.
That's right.
And to me, that's probably the most important inheritance that I have, is that knowledge.
Well, inheritance doesn't have to be something of value or a tangible thing. It could be something that reminds you, or
Exactly.
something you were taught, not just a keepsake.
Right. So God is a merciful God. Ahab should have known better than most. In 1 Kings 20, God extended mercy to Ahab during a time it seemed Ahab would be defeated by Ben-Hadad, king of Syria. The Lord told Ahab that victory would be his in spite of how much he looked like things would not go his way. After God brought his word to pass, evidently something changed inside of Ahab. Instead of being thankful for what God had preserved, Ahab became selfishly desire of the vineyard of Naboth, which was located next to the palace. Ahab wanted to turn it into a vegetable garden instead of a vineyard. He offered Naboth a certain price, which Naboth refused. Instead of simply accepting no as an answer, Ahab became despondent and depressed. He should have been content with what he already had, but his greed caused him to be consumed with what he did not have. We need to remember that God sees all. He knows all. He knows we already have an adversary who is roaming about, seeking whom he may devour. Our enemy not only wants to devour us, but he wants to devour any good thing that God brings into our lives. The blessings of life that we have, our walk with God, our families, all precious and valuable. Many of these blessings are part of a spiritual inheritance. The devil would like nothing better than to bargain them away from us. If we are not willing to make a bargain, he will do anything he can to destroy us. God sees everything, and he knows this about our enemy. Nothing is hidden from God, even the plans of the enemy. And that's what we have to remember. When there's things coming against us, God already knows what the plan of that enemy is, and he's already taken steps to subvert those. He's already taken steps to make sure that the enemy doesn't win. Just like with Naboth when he was going up against Ben-Hadad, he thought he was going to lose. And even though he wasn't always doing what God wanted him to, God's like, I'm going to put you through. You're still going to make it. You're still the king of Israel. So I'm going to show you mercy. And then he goes and does this to Naboth, even though it was in a roundabout way through Jezebel, and Jezebel's the one who signed his name. He didn't stop Naboth from being stoned. He stood there and watched it,
Right.
knowing that he was going to get the vineyard because of what was taking place. When Ahab returned home, he was distraught and refused to eat, and spent most of his time in bed and his face turned toward the wall. Jezebel noticed this and asked him, "Why is thy spirit so sad? Why hast thou that thou hast eaten no bread. 1 Kings 21:5. Ahab was quick to tell her of Naboth's refusal to sell the vineyard. Being the evil person she was, Jezebel took it upon herself to devise a plan to kill Naboth and give the vineyard to Ahab. She instructed Ahab to get up and cheer up. She told him she would take care of everything. Her plan involved writing devious letters and signing Ahab's name to them. The plot was carefully laid out to call an assembly and have Naboth accused of blasphemy. The tragic result was he was carried to the outside of the city and stoned to death. So another question. Have you ever been unjustly accused of something, and how did you feel?
I think everybody's been unjustly accused some point in their life, and it doesn't feel good, especially when you can't get anybody to see that
Right.
it was false.
Right. You know, I remember when we first moved to Alaska, we were working at a shop in the old Carter's Mall, me and my ex-sister-in-law. And it was called the Pretzel Shop. Some of you guys probably remember that place. And we get a call one Saturday morning, and the lady fires us. And we're like, what did we do wrong? Well, you stole $100 from us. There's $100 missing from the till. And she didn't take it, and I didn't take it. And she said, well, it's missing, so you must have taken it, so you're fired. Well, then she got to looking around the till, and she found the $100. And because we hadn't taken it, it was there the whole time, but she assumed, and we were falsely accused, and we lost that job as a result of it. And it makes you feel bad. It makes you feel like you've done something wrong, even though you haven't. Even though you know the truth, you still feel like you've done something wrong. And she never apologized. She never, sorry, my mistake, would you like your job back? She just moved on like nothing ever happened. And I mean, that's just one instance that I can think of right off the top of my head when I was reading this last night. But like Sister Susan said, everybody's probably got a story in here that they can tell where they've been falsely accused, and it doesn't make you feel good. Again, whether it's right or wrong is, because usually you've not done anything wrong when they're doing that. Perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of the story is that Ahab silently sat back and let a good man be put to death in order to fulfill his own selfish desires. No doubt Ahab knew that what was being done was wrong. He also knew that God had blessed him by giving him victory over enemies, yet he overrode all of that and allowed an injustice to occur. Jesus said in John 10:10, the thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. God is everywhere and very aware that the enemy of our souls will do anything he can to keep us from succeeding at living for God. There's an old song out there. I've been listening to it lately, and Alara loves to listen to it, and it's called Excuses. And it talks about all the different excuses that God will give you if you let him. He says he hates it. He loses when we come into church. But if he can get you to take these excuses and apply these excuses to your life to keep you from church, then he wins. And it's excuses like, my doctor tells me I shouldn't be around a lot of big crowds. That not to go to church because I need to take it easy. But yet you'll go to the ball game because it makes you feel calm. It makes you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Or, it's too cold, but now the temperature's just right, so I got to get out and do something outside.
Right.
Or, well, family's coming in, so I can't make it to church today. Well, we know that excuse didn't work because we have Brandy and her family here, and Sister Peggy and Brother Charles are still sitting in church today. Of course, I understand they're in church as well, but still, there's lots of people that do that. It's too hot, it's too cold. They have all these excuses why they don't want us to be in church.
Right.
And then the devil wins because they allow those excuses to keep him out of church.
Because once one excuse works, then another excuse is easier.
Yes, exactly. We say it's an excuse, but when you have to work, there are times that you have to work on during church. And that's understandable because we have to make money to support our families. We've all been there where we've had to work Sundays or work on Wednesday night. And, I've been away in Dutch Harbor at work, but I got to watch it live on Facebook so that at least I could, hear the message. But if we allow those excuses, then they will take over.
Right.
And before you realize it, you're just not coming to church anymore.
Or even just the devil feeding you lies about, well, you're not worthy, you don't belong there.
Oh, absolutely. I've been there. I've talked about that when I first came back, how I would feel walking through these doors that first time and everybody seeing me and how I felt they were going to judge me. In fact, Brother Mulligan talked about that just the other night on Friday, that exact same thing, when he had to walk back into a church after he had done some things that were wrong, and he had to face that church, and how were they going to receive him? And that's probably the backsider's biggest fear, is how am I going to be received? Am I going to be received with rejection or with love? And I was so thankful when I walked in, and it was love in this place, and it has been. That's never changed. So the enemy may approach us with kindness, offering a bargain with us for what is valuable. He may even offer a high premium for us to sell out. The Lord knows the struggle the flesh has with temptation. His response to the temptation of the devil in the wilderness is still the best approach we can take today. Our response should be we should be able to appeal to the Word of God and say, it is written. 2 Corinthians 2:11 tells us we're not ignorant of the devices of the enemy. Through the leading of the Spirit, God makes us aware of the approach of the enemy in our lives. Naboth was a great example of standing his ground and not yielding to the devices of the enemy when tempted. Unknown to Naboth, God would reveal all this to Elijah. Just because Naboth had lost his life did not mean that God would turn a blind eye to what Ahab and Jezebel had done. The Lord revealed to Elijah and what Ahab had done to Elijah in Naboth's vineyard, enjoying the spoils of his evil actions. A swift and terrible judgment was pronounced by the man of God of Ahab. Elijah told Ahab that because of the great evil he had done, he would lose his prosperity, and the dogs would lick up his blood in the same place where they had licked up Naboth's blood. Ahab and Jezebel failed to realize that nothing is hidden from the Lord. 1 Corinthians 4:5 declares, "Therefore judge nothing before the time until the Lord come, who will bring the light of the hidden of the darkness, and will make it manifest the counsels of our hearts. And then shall every man praise God." In other words, God sees all. Nothing is hidden from him. He will bring out in the light those things that were formed against him in darkness. Once they are exposed, he will execute judgment on them. Regardless of what has been done, what we have gone through, God has not turned a blind eye towards us. He sees everything. The pain, the suffering we endure has not slipped by him unnoticed. God is very aware and will not let such things go unpunished. So last question. Can you think of a situation where you observe someone doing evil act as if God was not watching? That's a pretty tough question. I can think of somewhere we're dealing with right now, with all this rioting and all these people burning down churches and burning down businesses, like God's not watching, like God doesn't care. But God is going to bring down judgment on these people. I mean, this because they're destroying things that's not theirs, just like Ahab did to take over this vineyard of Naboth. I mean, he went and killed Naboth to take the vineyard. I mean, we're seeing it firsthand right now. Look in the news anywhere. Anyone else?
Well, I did with my ex-husband. There was things that he broke man's law and God's law, and it got to a point I couldn't watch it. I couldn't be with that.
Right.
I think sometimes people convince themselves that, they spend a lot of time in their heads justifying their thoughts and justifying their actions, and it gets to the point where they feel they're very righteous in what they're doing, and
Right.
it either doesn't matter to them if God is watching or not, or they've got themselves convinced that since they're right, that God's going to go with whatever they decided to do.
Right. Anyone else? Our desire must be to please the Lord. Naboth took no thought for the wealth that could have gained by selling the vineyard. Rather, he was more concerned with what was pleasing to the Lord. God not only sees the evil acts of our enemies, he also sees the righteous acts of our own heart. While the enemy will be judged for his evil, we will be blessed for our righteousness. Proverbs 16:8 tells us, better is a little righteousness than great revenues without right. Naboth was more content with a vineyard that was produced what it did and having a righteous heart than he would have by selling just for money. So internalizing the message, in Psalms 139:7, the psalmist asks the question, whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? And many such questions are rhetorical. The psalmist knew there was nowhere he could go where God could not see him.
Right.
The same is true today. God sees all, nothing is hidden from him. To the sinner, this could be a frightening proposition, but to the faithful, it is one of the greatest comforts we can know in this life. The knowledge that God watches over everything that happens to us and brings us great confidence in him. There will be times that when others will treat us unjustly, it will hurt and could cause us to turn aside from God. However, the story of Naboth should be an encouragement to us that God will not allow evil to go unnoticed or unpunished. He is faithful to those who are faithful to him.
Amen. Thank you, Lord.
So we'll be back in here about 11 o'clock.